All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the next installment of our Reliability 101 and 201 webinar series over here at Texas RE. Today, we've got one of our OMP compliance analysts, Phil Bracey, here to discuss the foundations of operations and planning, or OMP, as the kids say, compliance programs. Before we get started, we've got just a few things to go over. First, as always, which you can see up on your screen right now, is our antitrust admonition. I will spare you listening to me read it, but remind you that if you have any questions, to please contact our general counsel. This is one of many of our 101 and 201 webinar series installments. And up here, you can see the calendar of all our other sessions. We've got 2 sessions next week. The 19th is Juneteenth, so we will be closed. And then on the last week, we've got 1 session on the 24th and a double header on the 25th. While we've got this going on, the ERO has events of their own that are also underway. NERC has their GADS wind and solar template and application training going on through the end of July. On June 27th, MRO will have their regional summer assessment webinar, and then on July 22nd, there will be a technical talk at RF. As I mentioned to those of you who got here early, if you've got any questions today, Slido is the place to do it. To get to Slido, go to sli.do or slido.com and enter today's participant code, which is TXRE, or you can scan the little QR code on the lower right hand of your screen. We've also got a few questions of our own for some interactive segments of this presentation, so make doubly sure to get signed into that. And while you are doing so, I will turn it over to our presenter, Mr. Phil Bracey.
Hey, Thad. Thank you for the introduction. Like Thad said, my name is Phil Bracey. I'm part of the ONP compliance program here at Texas RE. I joined up here about 18 months ago. Prior to that, I spent 6 or 7 years helping facilitate revisions to the ERCOT protocols, operating guide, planning guide. So about 8 or 9 years in the world of analyzing energy industry policy procedures, rule books, and so on. Thank you guys for joining us this afternoon. I'm happy to be here with y'all to share some helpful tips. So this slide here shows kind of our agenda for what we're going to cover today. Sort of at a high level, we're going to be working through the hypothetical scenario of developing an operations and planning compliance program sort of from scratch. So this presentation is 101 level. We're aimed today mostly at newer compliance staff. Maybe you have some compliance experience, but you're coming into energy utilities from another industry, or maybe you are a new primary compliance contact somewhere, maybe with a different registered function than last time. So 101 level, if you've been in the game a while, some of this might be repeat, but it's always, nice to get a reminder of good practices and so on. As you can see on the slide here, we've got this broken down into 3 phases that we're going to cover today. The first being defining your obligations. What we mean here is the discovery phase of sort of what are the standards we are responsible for following, or in other words, what do I need to do to meet the expectations, meet the requirements of my organization's role in the industry, aka your registered function, for example, generator owner, distribution provider, transmission operator. If you're ERCOT, you are reliability coordinator, planning coordinator, balancing authority, those type of things. The standards in the examples we're going to discuss today are geared towards a new generator owner, generator operator registrant, but the thought process here would apply to other functions as well. The second phase we're going to talk about is strategy. So once you have defined what you're responsible for, you're going to need to develop a strategy to comply with those requirements. So we're talking about here identifying what resources do you have, what resources do you need for tasks, staff, maintenance, those kind of things. Do you have enough staff to accomplish these things internally, or will you possibly be enlisting the help of a third party, for example, for things like studies or model validation, that kind of thing? This step, we are also going to identify, for example, what evidence would we retain and what internal controls do we need to ensure reliable operation and to ensure ongoing compliance with our applicable standards. And finally, in the third phase, you will need to implement what has been planned. This is kind of your documentation step, is kind of what I refer to it as personally. This is the part where you are going to put your plan into action, where you will be writing down all of your processes, procedures, training programs, and so on. So we're going to go through each of these and give some examples of differences between certain standards, some that mandate specifically a procedure or process versus others that do not. We will also talk about training obligations, required capability, and a few other things. Next slide, please. There we are. So Novice Power Company is a made-up power company for the purposes of this presentation. Before we move on, I've been encouraged to stress that these guys are completely fictional, totally hypothetical power company. Any of the examples and scenarios discussed in this presentation are strictly for the purposes of sharing knowledge and information and are not by any means indicative of our experiences with any particular entity or entities. The other thing you'll need to know as we get into this is that our completely fictional company, Novice Power, are going to be registering as mentioned, as a generator owner and generator operator, GOGOP, and they expect a commercial operations date, a registration date of roughly 8 months from now. So right around Valentine's Day of 2025, if I'm counting that correctly. Moving on. So as mentioned, step one. Next slide, please. I might be on a delay on this side. Thank you. Okay, so step one, defining your obligations. There's a few tools we can use to help us work through this. The first thing I would like to point you to is the rules of procedure. This is helpful for y'all as registered entities, but this is also a really important document for us here at Texas RE. It's really important that everyone is familiar with this document because it lays the groundwork for the processes in our regulatory system here in energy compliance land. So for example, in this document, you will find information about what monitoring methods you might be subject to and the process for those engagements. So for example, there we're talking about a compliance audit versus a spot check versus a self-certification. There's also information in there regarding evidence, for example, retention policies. How long are you required to retain certain information or documentation? It also captures what is required with respect to the process for if there is a finding of potential non-compliance, which is obviously something everybody needs to be aware of. In addition to the rules of procedure, as soon as you're registered, next Valentine's Day, Novice Power Company is going to be obligated to be compliant with whatever standards apply to them as a GOGOP on day one. There are certain things you will be expected to comply with as soon as you are registered. So we need to be asking ourselves, as head of the compliance program at Novice Power, how do I figure out what applies to me? Building that program from scratch is certainly not a small task, but there is a tool available to us for free on the NERC website that can help us sort it all out. This is called the U.S. effective date status functional applicability spreadsheet. Since that's so easy to remember, if you're taking notes, I'll say it again. The U.S. effective date status functional applicability spreadsheet. We're going to get some more details on that in one moment. But before we move forward, I did want to let you know also that Texas RE provides information as part of our registration process. Erin Quigley is our manager in registration and is happy to help with additional information. She recently did a registration 101 presentation, which I believe is available on our website as well. And also there is a generator welcome package under the entity resources header in the compliance section of texasre.org. Those resources are very helpful, you know, sort of at the beginning, at the forefront, as you're trying to identify all the things you're supposed to be doing. Next slide, please. So on this screen here, we have a screenshot of our fancy tool for defining our obligations, the almighty U.S. effective date status functional applicability spreadsheet. We couldn't fit the whole thing on this slide, so you'll notice a little bit halfway over, there's that green vertical bar, a little bit right of center. That's where we have collapsed some rows so that you can see the things that we want you to see there. So for example, on the far left, that status column currently is filtered to show only things that are currently effective, right? We can sort this thing by what do I need to know right now? What do I need to be ready for on day one? You can also, there's, you know, multiple filters in that status column. If you're looking to stay ahead of what's coming down the pipeline in the future, for example, there's a filter called filed and pending regulatory approval. And then once approved, there's a separate filter under there called subject to future enforcement. So a lot of ways to sort things depending on the information you're looking for with respect to how and when, right? So is it approved yet? If it's been approved, how much longer until it's enforceable, those kind of things. And then the other key thing I would point you to about this one is on that far right side, you can see that GO column there. So this is the section of the spreadsheet. Basically what you're going to be doing there is turning things on and off based on your registered function in order to see what you're hoping to see, right? So in our case, we want to see everything that applies to a generator owner as well as a generator operator. Do be careful about having multiple of those filters on at the same time. I've gotten into some situations where if you try and search for both things, it may only show you, for example, the cross section of things that are applicable to a GO and a GOP rather than just one or the other. So do spend your time playing around with that and make sure you have a solid understanding of how that works. This is, you know, I'm sure there may be other things out there as well, but this is the primary tool that we have to point you to with respect to discovering your obligations that your entity is going to be responsible for. Next slide, please. So this slide doesn't look like much, but there's quite a bit of information we're going to go through here, so hang in there with me. So we've gone through the spreadsheet. We've made our big list of all of the standards and requirements that we have to follow based on our registration as a generator owner, generator operator. We've got that thing nailed down. We know everything that we are going to have to be prepared to demonstrate that we're compliant with. So now step 2 is we're going to lead into our strategy for how we're going to accomplish that. First bullet there, identifying prescribed tasks where resources are internal resources are insufficient and third-party contractors may be required. So, for example, we're looking at the requirements we are responsible for and trying to make some determination about who do we need, when do we need them, and where. Defining what resources you have internally is really important so that you can also make decisions on where you might need to supplement from somewhere else. For example, maybe you're a smaller shop, maybe you don't have, maybe you have the expertise, but you don't have the man hour, for example, or manpower, excuse me, for example. So maybe you are reaching out to a third party in those type of cases. Obviously, we're not able to make any specific endorsements, but there are plenty of groups out there that are happy to assist with things like studies, model validation, development of training programs, and so on. A word of caution in that department, if you choose to go that route, you need to remember that ultimately you, the registered entity, are still the one responsible for demonstrating compliance with the requirements. So you need to be double checking the work. For example, say at Novice Power, we contracted somebody to do our validation for Mod 27. It's important that you guys are looking at these studies, at these reports that you're commissioning, and asking questions and verifying the work. Don't just pay for a study and assume you're done. You have to look at these and make sure that it's easy to understand how did they arrive at the conclusions that are presented in their reports. We would expect clear statements explaining the methodology used. Be very wary of reports that look really flashy, but maybe don't have a lot of meat on the bones. Additionally, it may seem obvious, but make sure the file that they give you is in a format that you can actually open and that it is not corrupted. It becomes really hard for us to document that you're compliant if nobody can open your file. Next, determining, back one, please, sorry. So next, you're going to be working with your subject matter experts, your SMEs, to clearly define what evidence will be needed to demonstrate compliance. What documentation are you going to retain to show that you completed the required tasks within the appropriate timeline? And how is that evidence going to be captured, maintained, and stored? It's a pretty big task to decide what you're going to keep or not. Definitely a balancing act. Keep in mind quality versus quantity. The measures in the standards provide examples of what documentation may constitute as evidence, but there's a wide range and a lot of variation of what you might choose to keep, and some things carry more weight than others, right? Quality versus quantity. So for an example, an attestation that you did something does count as evidence, but a procedure that requires that you complete a checklist when that task is done might be worth considering. Another key thing to remember when you're working through this step is how does the evidence that you're demonstrating or that you're choosing to keep, how does that demonstrate that you're compliant? For example, off the cuff here, PRC 27 R3, let's say you provided me XYZ documentation to demonstrate that you followed your procedure for 1.3.3. Something we might ask you is, show me where in this document did you determine that you had verified that any coordination issues had been resolved, right? Those are the type of things we're going to be asking. Be thinking about those, be prepared to answer those. And then we also will talk a little bit, we're going to talk about internal controls a whole bunch during this presentation, but kind of as a preview, what internal controls are you going to build so that you can ensure you continue to meet these requirements going forward? Internal controls are forward-looking into the future. This is really important to us here at Texas RE as well as NERC. Internal controls provide us a picture of how your future looks and helps us assess potential risk. Unfortunately, we don't get to see all of you every single year, which I know is a total bummer, but because we can't visit you as often as we like, knowing that you have good internal controls helps us have confidence in your programs. This conversation that we have as part of our engagements is also important from an outreach perspective. That idea sharing is very beneficial. We're able to share things that may help stuff run more smoothly in an effort to make that part of your life that has to live focused on compliance with NERC standards. We're trying to make that as convenient as possible for yourself and your organization. And internal controls are a big part of that. The last bullet here, there's some additional links to other resources that we didn't hit on previously in the discovering your obligation phase. So for example, on our website, there is a document called the Common Questions spreadsheet. There's a bunch of stuff on there about internal controls, as well as example questions of things we may ask, sorted, I believe, by standard and requirement. So you can look at that and sort of get a sense of what we are going to be asking you. I would also encourage you to participate in the NSRF and other forums. Additionally, you can review the NERC implementation guidance and practice guides. And then another thing there, that enforcement and mitigation link at the end of the list, it can be helpful if you want to see previous potential non-compliances to sort of get an idea of where challenges have come up in the past so that you can get yourself prepared for things that might be easy to miss. Next slide, please. I know that was a long one with a lot of information, so this slide is just a quick summary, right, as we get into our next steps. So we've gone through and talked with our staff and identified our SMEs and sorted out what do we have, what do we not, with respect to what we think we can maintain and execute internally, as well as what we think we're going to have to outsource. We can also, from there, we can begin to implement our strategy around that. We think we have a pretty good idea of what evidence we're keeping. We've sorted out how we're going to, what our explanation is for how that evidence demonstrates our compliance with the requirement. And we've built some internal controls around recurring requirements to ensure things don't fall through the cracks. And we've bookmarked all those things on the last slide and familiarized ourselves with using those tools so that we can stay informed about revisions to standards or future ones coming down for the first time. Next slide, please. So this is our first Slido question of the day. What standards has your organization identified that internal controls are necessary to maintain and demonstrate compliance? PRC5. PRC5 is a good one. ValTRE, another good one there. What controls do you have to make sure your operators get their notifications in on time? PRC is a good one. Initial performance for your relays, those kind of things. CIP10, absolutely. Order 901. Thank you for your participation there, FAC8. There, a bunch of people must have said FAC8 because that one got really big. So we'll touch on that one more later. But for example, FAC8, a good example of an internal controls. Walkdowns. We know it's hot here. It takes a lot of work. Walkdowns are important. Periodic review of your methodology to make sure it stays current. Mod 25 is another good one. Thank you all for your participation there. Let's move on ahead to the next one. I might have got ahead of you. Sorry, can you go back one just in case? I don't have it in front of me in two places. I'm going to trust that you're in the right spot. Sorry. Okay, so now we're on to phase 3 of our compliance program development plan. This is the meat and potatoes of what we're going to be covering. This is the implementation step. As you can see on this slide, we've got this broken down into some sub-steps. This is where we're going to take action on the ideas that we developed during our strategy phase. For example, documenting our procedures and processes that will be the framework for how our organization will be generating, collecting, and storing our evidence for different requirements. So, example on the left, right? Documenting your processes. We're going to work our way left to right. You're going to document your processes. You're going to verify that what you wrote down is actually possible. This is kind of the real world test to determine if you really do have the right people and tools in place in order to meet those obligations. Another area is training. Is our pretend novice power company qualified to develop and administer the training ourselves, or do we need help of a third party there? You might even consider setting up a training procedure, development procedure, so that you can have a systematic framework for how those programs are developed. You will be, during the implementation phase, completing the initial performance of prescribed tasks. When is that stuff due? The main reason we have that generator welcome package I mentioned earlier is to educate entities on what their obligations are on day 1. So please go check that out on our website. For internal controls, you should be designing these with a mindset of, how is this tool going to help me ensure continued compliance with this requirement going forward? A lot of my time in my role here as an auditor, we are required to do an internal controls assessment in addition to confirming and documenting compliance. So be prepared for both of those conversations when we come to visit. Additionally, we are going to be, during the implementation as part of it, performing periodic reviews or internal audits of your compliance program, gap analysis to see, where do you want to be? How do you want to get there? Next slide, please. So as mentioned, during our implementation phase, we're probably going to be writing a lot of internal process type documents to ensure that our operators are doing the things that they need to do according to the standards. The examples on this slide are cases where the standards are pretty specific about, you shall have a process for blank and it shall contain the following. In these examples, there is more provided to us within the standard itself with respect to what needs to be included in our procedure. For example, PRC 5, there should be a process with a defined periodicity to review and maintain protection systems. We should be retaining evidence that will provide reasonable assurance that the right tasks were completed within the time frame. Another example here, PRC 27, again, requires entities to define a process for developing new or revised protection system settings, and this includes working alongside your electrically joined neighbors. This is an example we want to highlight because it's another case where balance is important. What I mean by that is sometimes, for example, if your procedure is lacking detail about how you accomplish what you're doing and what evidence you're keeping, it sometimes can result in our team having to ask a lot more questions and do additional interviews in order to really get a firm understanding of what you guys are actually doing in practice so that we can do our job as auditors to document reasonable assurance that you are compliant with the requirement. So building your procedure with the mindset of setting yourself up for success with respect to how you are tracking completion of key activities, what you are keeping and why, in addition to where, is really, really important. If your procedure lacks detail, it can lead to kind of sometimes a sad situation where you may be actually doing what you're supposed to do, but have neglected to retain appropriate evidence to show that you have done that. So always be keeping that in the back of your head as you work on these kind of things. As a reminder, like I said, just keep that in the back of your mind. What am I saving? Why am I saving it? Right? How am I going to tell Phil, here's the thing I kept and it demonstrates our compliance with this requirement because it shows XYZ. Please, if you remember nothing else from today, that would be one I would love you to write down. Next slide, please. So a couple more quick examples of this. We're in examples of standards that have specific requirements about what should be included in your process. So this is EOP 11.2 here, R7. We did not show the entire standard on this slide, but the key thing we want you to pay attention to here is that based on this highlighted language, you shall implement and maintain one or more plans. It shall include the following at a minimum. We expect you to address all of those points. Sometimes in the standard, there is an applicability section up at the top that further defines standards by possibly technology type or a certain situation. But in a lot of cases, the standards can be technology indifferent or agnostic. So what I mean there is, as an auditor, I do not typically have the privilege of a certain level of granularity within, for example, the definition of generator owner to separate out, for example, like in those sub bullets under 7.3, we're not allowed to say, oh, but for these renewable guys, their fuel is the sunshine and the wind, so they don't have to write anything down for 731. No, we don't have that luxury. So please, if it were me, when I see this, your procedure shall include XYZ, regardless of technology type, I would make sure that I address all of those points in some fashion. Next slide. Similar example here, FAC 8. Usually when we see you for FAC 8, we are auditing R6, which is you shall have ratings that are consistent with your documented methodology for R1, R2, or R3, depending on your registered function. Again, we don't have the whole standard on the screen here, but just demonstrating the point about how some standards can be pretty prescriptive with what needs to be included in your procedure. In this case, for facility ratings, your methodology shall be consistent with at least one of the following bullet points here on 2.1. Some of the things we're not reflecting on this slide. You shall have a statement that you respect the most limiting element. You shall address normal and emergency ratings and so on, which is a great segue into my next point, which is that some standards, like these on the next slide, are not so prescriptive. Some standards don't necessarily require specifically that you develop and maintain an internal procedure document that includes XYZ statements. But in the absence of that, if it doesn't require you to develop a procedure, the standard still will say you shall do something. For example, following a voltage schedule, right? These are all things you still need to demonstrate compliance with. So it's critical to always be thinking about, how am I going to set myself up for success, so that I know exactly what evidence I'm going to keep, so that when Phil comes to visit, we know what to show him. We know exactly why we kept this stuff and what it's intended to show. A couple examples here. Val 1 TRE, how do you ensure that your operators notify the balancing authority within 30 minutes of a change in governor status? What system do you have in place to ensure that your contact list remains up to date? What evidence will you retain to help demonstrate that the notification was done on time? Another way you can think about building these things is kind of start from the situation and build from there. So in the context of this example, what are all the things that need to happen when a change in governor status occurs, right? You can maybe build your workflow that way. For COM1, what methods of interpersonal communication will you use? How are you going to demonstrate that they work? PRC4, what evidence will you capture to demonstrate that your guys have been analyzing those operations and developing corrective action plans within the required timeline when you have determined that there has been a misoperation? Or even further, VAR2, what alarms do you have? What procedures do you have in place to ensure that your operator communicates to the TOP when they are not able to follow a voltage instruction? If you're in our area and in the ERCOT region, you're getting that instruction via ICCP, but it's still expected for you to communicate back to the TOP if you are unable to follow that instruction. Next slide. So another example here is COM1. So we're talking a little bit about required capability. Some standards require you to be able to demonstrate a capability to do something. In the context of COM1 3R8, we're talking about interpersonal communication. So interpersonal communication is a defined term, but that definition is pretty broad. It is literally defined as any medium that allows two or more individuals to interact, consult, or exchange information. So the standard itself does not determine what medium is used. You need to define that medium for yourself and demonstrate through that your entity has interpersonal communication capability with the balancing authority and transmission operator. So things like, is it a hotline? Is it phone? Is it email? Please don't choose carrier pigeon as your form of interpersonal communication. That one's really hard to audit. We got to get the bird to fly back and forth. And if it's not the same one, it gets really confusing. Next slide. So another example here about demonstrating a capability, data provisions in the context of IRO 10 or TOP 3. You have to satisfy the data specifications provided by your TOP or RC. For example, ERCOT posts their data specifications on the website in a spreadsheet. They are really good at keeping it up to date, but they do sometimes have changes. So it's really important, in order to maintain compliance with this, be thinking about how are you staying in sync with the requirements when changes are made? What internal controls, what systems can you build to ensure that you always are getting the most up-to-date information and providing it back correctly? On the bottom half of this slide, we're going to talk about monitoring and controls. That's TOP1. Does your operator have the right tools in order to determine if they can comply with an operating instruction? Do they have processes in place to know where and who to inform if they cannot? So for example, you might have something in your procedure that says, if you can't do it, contact ERCOT. The thing you might miss there is who at ERCOT does that person need to contact? how do you ensure that they're contacting the right person and that that contact info is up to date, right? Those are examples of things that we might ask. So developing a way to document that the conversation happened, that the notification went out. I really want to drive home that those are the things to be thinking about building into your processes. Next slide. Another example is training. Some standards require training. Training is important. We have to do it. We need to know that your staff or the staff at Novice Power here are informed and have the tools and knowledge that they need to fulfill their duties. So there's a few examples of standards here that require training, kind of like the examples we were just discussing. The standards define the what you are supposed to train them on, but again, often they leave the how up to you. So some examples around internal controls when it comes to training. What mechanisms can you put into place to track completion of the training? How do you ensure the training is conducted within the required timelines and at the appropriate frequency? So one example I will hit on here is EOP 11. It's an area of focus right now. So for example, you'll notice on the screen, there's a couple keywords in there, providing unit specific training, right? So specific to your generator, your site, not something that's just good policy for everywhere, specific to the one that you are at. How are you defining the other keyword? So how are you defining and keeping current the subset of employees who are responsible for implementation of the plans? And at what frequency are you doing the training? For example, EOP 12 is going to come out later this year. There will be an annual requirement for the training. So it's not currently addressed in EOP 11, but we know that's something that's coming down the pipe. So if you do not already have an annual training process built into your program, I would look towards that. Another thing we might ask you with regards to training, how do you ensure that the training courses or program itself stays up to date and that people are retrained? For example, when there's a revision to your cold weather plans, how and when does the training get updated so that it remains in sync? The standard doesn't require that you maintain a specific process document that explains all this to me, but during that internal controls conversation, that's certainly something that we might ask. So having those internal controls and seeing that you have mechanisms for keeping your training document, or maybe it's a slideshow, whatever it is, seeing that you have a method for keeping that current when there are changes to the corresponding procedure that they are being trained on helps us have confidence in your programs. Next slide. So some other examples we're going to talk about. This slide is sort of a cautionary slide. The thing we're going to talk about here is that a lot of our standards were written by different teams at different times and are not always consistent in terms of specific language or terminology used. So the phrase we use around here, and the thing I would encourage you to write down to help remember this and keep it in mind, is to focus on the task, not the title. So for example, on this slide, we show a bunch of standards that refer to staff as operating personnel, and another set of examples that refer to facility personnel. Don't get hung up on the difference in the words, but instead be focusing on what needs done and who needs to do it. For example, in event reporting there, EOP 4 on the top, does the person who will be doing the reporting understand what the notification requirements are, and what your organization's process is for executing those correctly and timely. That's the kind of thing we're looking at. Focus on who's doing it, not what the standard calls that person. Next slide. So what are some standards that are emphasized in your organization's internal training program? EOP, love to see it. SIP, FAC8. Wonderful, wonderful. We like to see those that are areas of focus coming in on the slide there. PRC 27, more FAC8s, absolutely. Making sure everybody knows the process for example, if a repair, replacement, upgrade happens out in the field, you might have an internal control to ensure that your ratings stay up to date by having, through your change management process, right? If you go repair or replace this, you need to tell so-and-so so that it gets written down and that any changes in rating get communicated to the people that they need to communicate to. Thank you guys for your participation in the Slido. I do appreciate the group involvement there. It's tough to be lonely on those sometimes. Okay, so moving on. Initial performance. So we touched on this at the beginning. This is the stuff that's going to be happening, either expected to be already done on the day you're registered, or it's going to be coming up very quickly on or shortly after day one, your commercial operations date, your registration date. So FAC 8.5, R6, on day one, you have to have a facility rating methodology, which in turn means you should have a facility rating and its appropriate evidence. You should have a structure in place in order to provide those facility ratings to your neighboring entity, as well as the reliability coordinator. Some other examples, not necessarily day one, but will come up in the first year. For example, Mod 25, Mod 26, and 27. The language is a little different. One of them says within 12 calendar months. One of them says, I believe, within 365 calendar days. But point being, on day one, you probably want to already be ahead of how you are going to satisfy that that within the first year requirement for those studies and verifications. Next slide, please. Okay, we're almost there. Another example we want to hit on because it is a tricky one and we do see people get hung up on it. PRC 5, there's a lot of moving pieces there, and depending on your size, it can get pretty tricky. Some of you guys have 10,000 relays out there. Regardless of the number of devices that you need to maintain, you have to have initial performance dates associated with the type of component, and you must be able to document that. And really for all of the examples on the screen here, do you have the right internal controls to ensure you perform these activities by the timeline and frequency required in the standard? What evidence am I keeping to demonstrate completion? Where is it saved in our database? Is it easy to get? Do we have backups? And again, I'll remind you, as part of that evidence conversation, please be mindful of quality, right? Attestations are evidence, but documentation carries a little bit more weight. So be thinking about that and be building a system in your procedure around that so you can catch those things as they are created and get them filed so that demonstrating compliance can be easier for you. Next slide, please. So we're in the home stretch here. As a reminder, when we come and see you, we're going to be evaluating two things. We're going to be looking at your past by reviewing if you were doing the things you were supposed to be doing during the monitoring period, during the engagement period. And we're going to be looking at your future through your internal controls. So that first bullet on there, again, alarms. Following a voltage schedule seems easy. We get a we get a telemetry data point for the expected target value. And if we need to change it, we should change it. But if you don't have any system, any alarm or notification, it's possible that your operators might see too late or never that there was a schedule change. So again, internal controls come into play there, and an alarm when it changes so that you can make extra sure that your operators take the appropriate actions within the right timeline is very important. Change management is a good example. We talked just a minute ago about repair, upgrade, or replace in your facilities, making sure that your facility ratings get updated and communicated. So again, I'll hit on walkdowns. A good internal control is to perform a walk down, like while you're there doing your repair or replace, maybe walk down the rest of the facility, make sure nothing else that was maybe changed previously and went undocumented. You can be checking for those things. In addition to conducting a walk down, when you go out there to do maintenance, you could consider walk downs on a periodic basis also. It's not everyone has the resources to be sending their guys out taking pictures and nameplates at substations all day. But if you wanted to implement a system for walk downs, you could consider doing it based on the age of facility or maybe potential risk. For example, your higher output, or ones that are connected to larger transmission, that kind of thing. Additionally, you can think about for training, think about your onboarding process. What can you build into your systems for onboarding to ensure that new employees get up and running with all the right tools and required training? Those are just some things that will help. Next slide, please. So what are the 3 phases we discussed for building your operations and compliance programs? You guys were paying attention. Thank you very much. It's nice to see that. So yeah, again, defining your obligations, right? Making really sure that you've gone through all the tools and have a clear picture of everything that is expected of you, obviously, is step 1. And then defining your strategy, right? Identifying what can we accomplish in-house and what do we maybe need some external help with. For cases where we do need external help, what are we doing to make sure that we verify the work? So for example, training, are my guys trained up enough to be able to verify the work? Those kind of things. And then implementation, right, is all of your initial performance, your ongoing performance, your documentation, how you're keeping your evidence, what evidence you're keeping, and really putting that strategy into action so that you can set yourself up long term. That's the name of the game right there. Please go ahead to the next slide. Again, my name's Phil. I'm an O&P analyst here at Texas RE. My contact info is on the screen if you would like to reach out with any questions. And I believe that might wrap it up for me unless there are some questions. I will warn you, I don't know if I can see them in the chat. I might need to call one of my lifelines if possible, but Are there any resources available to entities? Yes, there are a few. So there is obviously the implementation guidance and practice guides. Sorry, I just caught the name there. I would look at our website as well. There are quite a few. I'll see if we can get some links in the chat maybe to those. Yep. Okay, here we go. So there is a document called, let me see if I can put it over there, or it might be. Okay, yeah, they are in the chat. My apologies. So best, it's called, it's another one with a long title, ERO Enterprise Themes and Best Practices for Sustaining Accurate Facility Ratings. That's out there in a NSRF presentation from last fall. It is available. There's a link in the chat there for some more if you would like to see. Okay. I don't see anything else in the chat.
Yep. Phil, it looks like you don't have any more questions as of yet, but folks, definitely keep them coming. You've still got a minute or so left. While we wait for questions to come in, Phil, do you have any maybe closing comments for the audience here today?
I hope I said it enough times, but again, just focus on those three things: defining your obligations, building a strategy based on your resources, and then implementing. And staying focused on choosing quality evidence, and how have a clear picture of how the evidence you have chosen to keep demonstrates your compliance with the requirement, and being ready to explain that to us. I think that's probably the parting gift I would leave with.
Great. Thank you so much, Phil. Thank you, folks, for joining us today. Just a reminder that tomorrow's Reliability 101 session is going to be on navigating non-compliance resolution. Same reliable time, same reliable place. We hope to see you there, and we hope that you enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Take care.
Thank you. Have a good afternoon.